Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of All Access AM. Happy Thursday to you guys. I am Billy Embody. We appreciate you guys joining us on a busy morning. Some Olympic hockey men's getting going here this afternoon. The U.S. team starting out around 2 o'clock Central. So I am getting ready to go into my Olympic watch mode. Love watching the hockey. Love watching the U.S. dominate Canada in women's hockey. Earlier this week, huge win for them to get that done. But we've got a huge win for you guys, the ACC fan that may have stumbled upon our show this morning, because we have two special guests. James Fletcher of On3 Bracketologist will join us at 7:30 a.m. Central Time. And then we'll have David Cunningham for his second appearance on the show from Tech Sideline. He's going to share with us how the transfer portal rebuild went with the Hokies under James Franklin this year and his first year expectations and where those are going, as well as talk about Virginia Tech's big win over Clemson as ACC basketball continues to have a little bit of chaos with it now over the last week or so. And we will cover all of that, what it means for the NCAA tournament and more with James Fletcher in bracketology. And again, David will break down all of that on the tech side of things and that big win for them over Clemson earlier this week. So lots of fun things going on in the show today. And we also have some way too early ACC football rankings. CBS Sports released theirs. I thought we're going to play a little game of high-low early in the show and share some thoughts on where I think some teams could or should end up being relative to our early rankings, which we should drop here in the next couple weeks, really. And we'll also look around the ACC at quarterback battles. So got a lot to do with you guys this morning on this Thursday. So we appreciate you guys being here on All Access AM. The Thursday show is presented by our friends at Horn Legend. And Horn Legend, for many of you, is becoming the place to go, so much so that they turned off the promo code. If you've been a listener, if you've been following the show, and we've been talking up the, hey, get free shipping with code PONY. Guess what? That is no more. That is how quickly things are flying off the shelf. They said, you know what? We don't have to offer the code anymore. So you can look stylish. You can do all of those things. And I'm not quite sure because my browser's not showing it, but sometimes you do get some of those discounts for ordering X number of things. I'm not sure if that applies, but you should head over to Horn Legend. Check out their lineup of sports shirts. They have anywhere from like a heavier style, so you're maybe geared up for the winter that is moving across the country in various spots, or get ready for spring. You know, for me, I run a little hot, so I got to have the lightweight sports shirts that breathe and still look stylish, or at least I like to think so. They also have the hidden button, which I think is a great trend that you can take advantage of with our friends at Horn Legend, so you can look dapper and all lined up for your business meetings with our friends at Horn Legend. They, of course, have all sorts of collegiate wear across the ACC, and they are proud supporters of our Thursday show. So we appreciate them, and we appreciate you guys for buying so much gear. So we will have another code that will go out eventually, I'm sure. But for now, you're going to have to wait. And if you slacked, guess what? Maybe listen to us on the codes, because they are limited for most of these companies. They will run out. They will change them. And Horn Legend hit that point where you guys have done a great job supporting them. So it was time to make a change on that front. So they're coming up with some new things for you guys, and we'll keep you posted. But appreciate their support of the show. I went back and forth here on where I want to start, but I want to start with quarterback battles across the ACC, because this conference going into this season might be a little bit more driven around the changes at quarterback and the new faces at quarterbacks than last season, which was, one of those years that the ACC touted as the year of the quarterback, where you had Cade Klubnik coming back, you had Haynes King, you had Darian Mensah transferring to Duke, you had high-profile names going into the 2025 season with Kevin Jennings and Chandler Morris and all sorts of players that have arrived in this conference or changed within the conference. Hello, Tommy Castellanos. And I would say it ended up being a very mixed bag. We know what Haynes King went on to do and, fell short of a Heisman Trophy, but Cade Klubnik still ends up being a draft prospect, of course, but certainly one that disappointed in 2025. And at the same time, Darian Mensah ended up being a top 10 passer in yardage, and Kevin Jennings ended up being a top 10 passer in yardage, I believe, right there. And so both of those guys certainly had statistical seasons that they'll remember, but both fell short of probably reaching the full expectations, unless you're Darian Mensah, who won an ACC championship, but lost 5 games in what was that weird 2025 year. This year, so many quarterback competitions across the country. And on threes, Pete Nakos did a good job of headlining a lot of those competitions. And Clemson is the one that is going to be a make or break type of competition. With Clemson offensive coordinator Chad Morris at the helm for the Tigers now, he's got to make a decision over the course of spring and fall camp. And that is, who's going to be the guy? Is it going to be Christopher Vizina, who got some time, saw some good things happen to him in 2025 when he got opportunities? But at the same time, is he the right fit in this Chad Morris offense? Or is it Chris Denson, the redshirt freshman? Or is it true freshman Tate Reynolds? Because this Clemson attack still has talent. They still have some different weapons and pieces for whoever's at quarterback to utilize and get out and have explosive plays. And Chad Morris wants to push the ball down the field. But you're also looking for maybe a little bit of a running element here. So who can win out in this one? I thought Christopher Vizina looked really good in his first start against SMU. He was doing some of the things that we kind of expected Clemson to do over the course of the season: chuck the ball down the field, not have issues getting it to their playmakers. And obviously SMU had a leaky secondary at times, but certainly a game for him where he was able to step right up and have Clemson in that game until SMU pulled away late. There is still concerns about, okay, is he that guy for this offense? Or is it Chris Denson, somebody who moves around a little bit more and can get the offense moving with his feet, in an offensive line that certainly didn't play up to standard last year? I think a run game that didn't give you much. So you're going to need a quarterback who can create, I think, this year. And I think that's where Dabo Swinney made the decision ultimately, that he feels good about where the quarterback room is, but is it good enough for Clemson to return to Charlotte or be very competitive in the ACC championship race? Count me in the camp that right now says no. I also would add the caveat that there's certainly some unfairness to that, because I don't know if they have the run game. I don't know if they have the offensive line play to help whoever is at quarterback get to that type of a level. So Clemson will be fascinating to watch and see. Sometimes it's not that superstar quarterback. Sometimes it's the next one that ends up getting some of the glory. You remember T. Martin is the one that won a national championship for Tennessee. I think of some of those types of players that have followed great ones and ended up living out their dreams as far as on-field success. I think that's always interesting to watch across college football, and just kind of how the handoff goes from certain players to the next. So you look at the rest of the ACC, though. Florida State, not really a quarterback competition here, but Ashton Daniels comes in. He is the perceived starter, and I think that's how this one ends up. We talked a lot about Ashton Daniels with Matt Lacer of War Chant on the Wednesday show. If you missed that, go ahead and watch it. But I think this is a position that Mike Norvell is going to leave no stone unturned. I think they brought in somebody like Malachi Marshall, who is a really intriguing player out of the junior college ranks. He was the offensive player of the year out of that division, and was able to do a lot of big things at that level. But at the same time, you have another guy, Dean DeNoble from Lafayette, who comes in. And then, I know EJ Manuel talked up Kevin Sperry, one of the youngins in that quarterback room last year as a true freshman, but I just don't see it. I think this is Ashton Daniels' room to lose. And I think he's certainly the best player out of that group as well for the Seminoles. Duke will still await the a decision on Walter Eget, the San Jose State transfer at quarterback. And if not, it's going to be a competition between Ari Patu and Dan Mahan at quarterback. Ari Patu came from North Alabama, and Dan Mahan was on the roster in 2025. What a mess that Duke quarterback room is. And you absolutely feel for Johnny Brewer, the offensive coordinator, and Manny Diaz and that whole team with how it went down. But that is their battle. I'm looking forward to learning more about the potential two options of Ari Patu and Dan Mahan. But Walker Eget would be certainly somebody that has experience. Will be in an offense that I think could be more explosive than certainly what he was at San Jose State. That's a position where if it's Walker Eget, I think Duke is in a better spot than where Walker was. So Walker had some struggles last year and over the course of his career at times. But I do think you're going to see, if he does see the field and gets a waiver for 2026, a improved situation for him that allows him to be more successful. Now, does Duke take a step back? Look, they went 7-5 last year. Yes, they won the ACC. I don't know how to look at Duke because I can't sit here and say, well, they're going to be able to navigate their non-conference schedule any better with somebody taking over that, I don't even want to say, doesn't have the credentials, but doesn't have the credentials of a Darian Mensah coming in last year. But it's just a really, really interesting quarterback room that could be in pretty bad shape. Like it could be, if Walker Eget doesn't get his waiver, it could be North Carolina kind of turmoil level of last year's quarterback room for the Tar Heels. That I think that's what we could see here in Duke. So just something to keep an eye on. You kind of feel for them as a whole. When we look around the rest of the ACC, some of these are more like, hey, you brought in competition, but at the same time, there is kind of a clear-cut player that I think could very well be the starter. When I look at North Carolina, Billy Edwards and Miles O'Neill, I think it's going to be Billy Edwards. All the things he does as a quarterback and just developing from his days at Maryland and then going to Wisconsin and things like that. I do think he's got the upper edge over Miles O'Neill. But Bobby Petrino did have Miles O'Neill when he was at A&M as the offensive coordinator. So that is something to not sleep on. That is something that you should file away. If it doesn't work out early on with Billy Edwards, a redshirt senior, maybe they say, okay, Miles O'Neill, we're comfortable with you. The offense, maybe things can be built for the future and push that in that direction. But I think it's certainly Billy Edwards' job to lose for Bobby Petrino and Bill Belichick in that team in 2026. Now, the peculiar one that is going to be, I would say, interesting to watch, and it's so funny that, Bo Pribula comes in from Missouri by way of Penn State, but goes to Virginia, not Virginia Tech, is he also went to Virginia with Eli Holstein, who in theory can redshirt and also I believe he can redshirt here and end up having an extra year of eligibility. And if that's the case, then you can have a return at Virginia in 2027 for Eli Holstein, and he can kind of click reset on his career a little bit as he goes to Virginia now and ends up or he redshirted in 2024. So he might actually just have another year. But yeah, so he redshirted in 2023 at Alabama, transferred. Yeah, so he's got 2 years left. So he can play in a number of games. I remember when he transferred, somebody mentioned that the idea was, hey, we're going to have Bo Pribula here from Missouri, and then he's going to hand off to Eli Holstein because Bo has 1 more year left. So they will have a competition in the spring. I do think the more logical thing to do here is to see this as a cool. Virginia has invested in 2 quarterbacks that are looking for a fresh start, looking for somebody to believe in them, and you get that 2-year runway of here are your guys. So for Bo Pribula, who's been hurt, who also has an ability to make things happen on the ground, and you have an Eli Holstein, who's kind of a veteran guy, but has had a mixed bag of success in the last 2 years. This is a good situation for Virginia to be walking into. How much of a competition is it going to be this year? That'll be interesting to follow as this whole thing unfolds. But both are capable, and we'll keep an eye on this one. I expect Bo Pribula to be the starter. I think when he's on, he's really, really good. But Eli Holstein, I can't be counted out. Maybe a fresh start with Tony Elliott would be something that he needs. So keep an eye on that one. That'll be a fun one to keep an eye on. I would say, at least. So that's kind of a look around the conference with some of the quarterback competitions that we're watching really closely in this league. And again, I think it goes to a different world where we're not in that day and age right now of so many proven commodities. We're in the day and age of a very competitive ACC that could very well have, I mean, it needs a star or two to emerge from this new crop of transfer quarterbacks that have jumped into the fold here. It needs those crops to blossom and somebody to be that next guy up. And we saw it with Mason Heinschel and his kind of growing stardom this year. We saw Chandler Morris do some magic with Virginia. We knew Darian Mensah was kind of a household name. And then you had a lot of the returners I talked about earlier. And there are the Darian Mensah, the Kevin Jennings, some of those players that are back now in 2026 that have to carry that stardom. There's also some new names here that when the ACC gets looked back on 2026, we'll be grading it in part, and it's a huge piece and it's everywhere across the country, but you're going to look back and say, man, they did not get collectively either their quarterbacks right, or wow, collectively they knew exactly what they needed at that moment. Look at the improved quarterback play in this conference. It's so much more difficult now because Virginia hit, Virginia Tech hit. Look at what Clemson did by sticking to their guns. Look at what North Carolina did with either a Billy Edwards or a Miles O'Neill. Wake Forest, look, Gio Lopez looks like a totally different player now that he's reunited with his old OC back at Wake Forest. So fascinating quarterback discussions around this league. It's going to probably fly under the radar a little bit, but the good news is brands like Miami, brands like SMU are carrying it into 2026 with their quarterback play. And those two teams sit at the top of CBS Sports's way too early top rankings for the ACC. Here's the interesting thing. And again, we'll play a game of high-low here, but Miami number 1, SMU number 2. Virginia number 3. I would say high. I still think they're going to take a step back from what they did last year in the 2025 season where Chandler Morris kind of did so many things. I like Bo Pribula. I also want to see it work. And there's been some coaching staff shuffling and they're losing some key pieces and things like that at Virginia. I'm a little bit probably just side by side higher on Louisville and Lincoln Kienholz. I am very intrigued by that quarterback move by Jeff Brom to bring him in. If Lincoln Kienholz pays off, Louisville's probably going to be in Charlotte. That's how talented that roster is. That's what they've done in the transfer portal. They deserve that type of credit. It is also a heavy lift because right off the bat, they get tested in a game that doesn't count for ACC rankings, of course, with Ole Miss in Nashville, and then they play SMU in week 3. So they're going to have to be ready to go, but they have skill position talent. They do have a great roster of talent. It's always been consistency for Louisville. If they start fast, look out. But I would have Louisville above Virginia, at least in this. And here's where it gets a little wonky. And it is just a sign of, I think, how deep the league is. So we're in for some fun here. But everyone is jumping on Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech at number 5, just behind Louisville in the ACC rankings from CBS Sports. I really like James Franklin, how he operates. He doesn't really, waver. He has non-negotiables in his program that he lives by. But you're also looking at a program that I think offensively was so inept. Can they play the James Franklin way offensively and see those things take them to the upper echelon of the ACC in year one. To end up, finishing fifth in this league would be quite an accomplishment in year one. That would mean they're going to a bowl. They're in great shape. I mean, they've been in the ACC championship conversation in November. There's a world where that happens. I don't know. Sometimes I want to, when I look at way too early rankings, I want to keep in mind certain things about the year prior. I think when you have a team like Virginia Tech this high in rankings, and they can kind of generally have like a, probably 8-9 win season and be fifth in the ACC, but this is how you get caught having a Florida going into last year in your top 15 overall rankings. This is how you have an Auburn in your top 15 overall rankings. These types of projections of, oh, well, I mean, that's a good coach over there, and they did this and they did that. Well, okay, can we just not ignore what just happened and how poor they are and how they're going to fire their coach? Those are things that I just will never understand about media, and I'm a part of it. But man, you can't ignore what happened last year and just how behind Virginia Tech was offensively. And look, maybe that roster is better than I'm giving it credit for. Maybe the rebuild is better than I'm giving it credit for. And we'll talk with David Cunningham about that here very shortly. But it's a tough ask for them to be squarely in the ACC championship race in year one under James Franklin, in my opinion. So NC State at 6, Clemson at 7, Georgia Tech at 8. Still think that's low. And maybe I am buying too much Alberto Mendoza hype. But Georgia Tech has built a roster that I think has enough talent and depth to be a solidly, like, I would catapult Georgia Tech up to that 5th or 6th spot. I would, because you have a roster that, while each year it's lost major pieces, and whether it be last year going to last season, some of the talent, the pure talent they lost to the transfer portal, or whether it be losing Haynes King this year, they did find a way to have an even better year in 2025. So if they hit on Alberto Mendoza, they could outperform this. If they don't, it could be an issue. Aaron Philo was supposed to be the guy, but they did add a lot in the transfer portal, and I'm not ready to write them off just yet. I think Clemson is squarely a middle of the pack team right now. I don't think they've done nearly enough to improve their roster, but maybe Chad Morris catches fire somehow. But I would have Clemson a little lower. I think a team for me that won 8 games last year and had a true freshman quarterback, Jaron Kiwa-Sekapitelli, Cal's got to be up. Like, Cal's got to be up in that 6th spot range, because I think what they've done in the transfer portal and kind of building out that roster a little bit, uh, good enough for them to be hanging around in November, and at least in the conversation, and maybe having some big wins and big moments as that team comes together. But when you have a quarterback, I'm a big quarterback guy on this. When you have a quarterback that has shown the level of flash that a Jaron Kiwa-Sekapitelli has, I'm going to be buying stock and relying on him to make some plays and show, just how high level of a quarterback he is in year two. Quickly, Florida State too high at number 10. Duke probably too high at number 11, just with their quarterback room. Same with North Carolina at 12. Pitt at 13. Give me Mason Heinschel to have them up in that 10 spot, maybe that 9 spot. I think in year two, they've lost some key pieces off that defense, but a very, very good Pitt team. I think that I think we'll see kind of a level of consistency return there for Pat Narduzzi, and not a major step back. I like where Wake Forest is here in that 14 spot. I think we'll see them regress a good deal, just with all the things they lost to the draft, multiple NFL draft prospects, Damon Claiborne, the running back. I don't think they added enough in the transfer portal. You've got Syracuse, probably should be higher with Steve Angeli coming off of that Achilles injury. If he's ready to rock and roll, they'll be better than that. He was just on fire last year. I think they'll put it all together. He's a gamer. They'll be in good shape there to return to bowl eligibility and get that thing back on track. I don't think that is a program that is in complete shambles and is at the bottom. I think when you look at a year prior, you can't hold certain injuries against a team, right? Like that is the caveat I have on looking back a year prior. And Steve Angeli, you could tell they were a totally different team, led to coaching changes and a whole mess. Wrapping things up here, Stanford 16, Boston College 17. No arguments there. Both programs in very bad shape from a roster perspective. Boston College could be a little bit better. I think they could get to 5 wins. So maybe I'd swap those two, but those are two of the bottom teams in the ACC. Look, we are going to not talk about the bottom of the ACC in our next segment with James Fletcher of On 3, the bracketologist that always joins us, stepping in for us. But we are going to talk about the top, and we're going to talk about the chaos. We're going to talk about the NCAA tournament and what all this means. But we do want to remind you guys that we are presented by our friends at Sportsmo as well. Sportsmo sponsors our shows here at All Access AM, and we appreciate their support. Make sure you guys are supporting your favorite college basketball teams with micro donations that go right to student athlete benefit funds to support them and what they do and those rev share opportunities for them. So make sure you download the app today and learn how you could support your favorite team right now in the midst of college basketball season.
College basketball hits different with Sportsmo. You tap, they score. You pledge, they drop a 3. You give as a group, they win as a team. At this point, you're not watching a game, you're in it. Download the app, fund your wallet, and get in the game. Download Sportsmo. Power the play.
We are excited now for our next guest to join us, James Fletcher of On 3 bracketologist. James, good morning to you. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. Happy to be on the show again and talk a little bit more hoops.
Crazy night last night in the ACC with Clemson going down. We've seen this now. You know, Miami, North Carolina, of course, the night prior. We'll get to Louisville and NC State as well, and what all this means for the NCAA tournament. But your takeaway, and even going back to Duke falling to North Carolina on Saturday, your takeaway from the last week of ACC play.
Yeah, it's been a crazy week, and it's really proven what we've said throughout the season, all the way back to the non-conference portion of the schedule, that the ACC, maybe they're not back to the dominant force in college basketball, but they are back in that it is entertaining basketball. There are a lot of teams on a nightly basis that can put together wins. We know that Duke-UNC rivalry, it always delivers. So that was great to see over the weekend. But to come out of that and then get Miami over UNC, a Miami team that had been kind of slipping back towards the bubble after making some progress, to get that big win on their resume was important. To have Virginia Tech, a team on the wrong side of the bubble that's been hovering there for quite some time, to pick up a big win against a Clemson team that had gotten hot, had continued to climb the board. It's really opened the window for this ACC conference to add some more teams to the field, to get some more recognition, and to really help solidify what has been a re-emerging season for the whole conference.
When you see teams like Virginia Tech knock off Clemson, how much of that is the depth of the league and just, you know, you don't want to start seeing it in February and into March. You're kind of just like teeter on beating each other up, or is that, you know, just kind of par for the course with how deep the league is this year?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation because there's some people who would tell you that you don't want your top teams from the conference to be taking losses throughout that portion of the schedule because it will hurt them in their pursuit of that bubble. Clemson, of course, a team that is on the right side of things, so you don't have to worry as much about them in this conversation. But I do look at another maybe not upset, but loss that happened last night in the league, and Syracuse beating Cal is going to be one that could hurt the ACC's chance to get additional teams into the field. Having a Cal that had made a surge, had some decent wins on its resume, a win over North Carolina among theirs that they boast as well. But to take that loss against Syracuse in overtime, that's going to ding them. Obviously, their second loss in a row here in conference play, so that's going to hurt them. But it is kind of a give and take. You want as many teams as possible to have the good wins, and sometimes that takes some upsets happening. That takes some of the Virginia Techs, teams of that caliber in that tier, getting wins and getting further along in that bubble conversation, getting closer to that cut line. So yes, you want your top teams to dominate down the stretch of the season here because it helps maximize their seeding. But you also want those teams that are in the bubble conversation to have a big thrust forward as well. So there's some give and take in these big matchups. At the end of the day, it's hard to really tell until Selection Sunday when we find out what the NCAA tournament selection committee really thought about this conference and the strength of these wins as these teams start to knock each other off and get a little bit more competitive.
The conversation around Miami is fascinating, I would imagine now, because for the entire run of the ACC play, it's been, well, Miami just hasn't played anyone really. We haven't really seen this or that. And then they go out and beat North Carolina, who just beat Duke. It's certainly a team in North Carolina that was squarely in the top 25, let alone, being a, just solid net team there as well. What is your take on now Miami's ceiling for this season? But they also, to the depth of the league conversation, go through a little bit of a buzzsaw here coming up as well.
Yeah, I can imagine that being a Miami fan throughout this whole season has been just extremely frustrating because you sit at 19-5, 8-3 in the conference, and you would have taken that in a heartbeat to start the season. And you would have probably thought that you'd be more in the conversation for the top 25 than the NCAA tournament bubble. But because of the strength of the schedule, the strength of record that they've put together to this point, the way that the analytics haven't always matched up with what has, been in the box score, it's led to them being still in this bubble conversation. And so I can imagine that it's very frustrating to see, look, we are winning the games in front of us, but that's where basketball is so different. Yes, your schedule does matter. The wins that you did pick up versus the losses you took is very important to your resume for postseason play. So Miami is still very much in the mix, but they don't have the same cushion, even though their record might suggest, if you just looked blindly at who in the ACC has a good record, the resume doesn't necessarily match up with the record. So it's going to be interesting. They still need to string together performances. The UNC win was massive for them, but the way that the bubble works, particularly this late in the season, just one big win doesn't always jump you 2-3 seed lines up the board. It's going to take a few consistent results, string together 3-4 wins, and then you'll slowly make your way up the board. And that obviously still depends on the teams right above you taking a few losses along the way too to help you make that leap.
Let's talk about Virginia Tech real quick here, and then we'll get into kind of looking ahead to the weekend. Here's their final 6 games. I think it's really interesting. Florida State, Miami, Wake Forest, North Carolina, Boston College, Virginia. They're 6-6 in league play. They are sitting here with a record at 17-8 overall. They are on the bubble as it stands in your latest round of bubble talk on 3. They have a manageable schedule of sorts. Like it's, they could go 4-2 down that stretch. Where would that type of performance put them? They can obviously go, any sort of run, but it's a gettable schedule in a sense.
Yeah, I think 4-2 is really the mark you look at. You nailed it there. 3-3 puts you in a difficult spot because it puts you at 500 in league play. It kind of drags you down into the conversation of teams that have not just 10 losses, but that would be 11 losses. So it's easier to dismiss teams that have those double digit in the loss column. You also look at where those wins come, quad 1 and quad 2. You're going to get a couple more opportunities here to add to the top end of your resume, even though, like you said, it's very manageable in terms of the ACC, in terms of being in a top tier conference, the closing stretch that you can have. If they can go 4-2, you put yourself in position where you enter the ACC tournament weekend and you look around, you start evaluating, you say, okay, here are the 3-4 teams that we've got to have a better tournament run than, not obviously in the ACC per se, but across the country. We've got to do better than New Mexico. We got to go deeper in our tournament than New Mexico gets in the Mountain West. And then you kind of are able to set that goal for yourself. And whether you achieve it, obviously up for determination. Who you go out to in the ACC tournament will also play a role here. If you lose to Duke, you're not going to get dinged for what you did in the postseason. But if you take a loss early in that tournament to a Miami, to a Boston College, something like that, that would, of course, then harm your resume more than it would help you. And so I don't think that they're, barring an undefeated run through the end of this regular season, going to really lock themselves into the field, but they can definitely make it manageable with a 5-1, 4-2 stretch to finish here. If they can get to that point, I think the ACC tournament looks gettable. It looks like a situation where they can play themselves into the field with a few wins in that postseason situation.
North Carolina falling to Miami certainly puts the Tar Heels, just to, it kind of maybe knocks them down a peg probably in most bracketologists' mind, just with where their season has gone. It's been all over the place. So when you get the best of Carolina, it's certainly fun to watch. You could see them going on a run in March Madness, but it's also the other side of it where, okay, just how good is this team? And that's where they've been hanging around, kind of 25 to 30 in the net. And certainly that loss to Miami impacting that as well. But what's your take on North Carolina and what they need to do, not only from an on-court perspective, but obviously their performance down the stretch here in league play?
Well, it's unfortunately been kind of what North Carolina is these days. We've seen them have bad seasons and still make it to the Final Four. We've seen them have good seasons and exit early. We've seen them have seasons where they looked like they were going to be a top team and miss the tournament. We've seen them even have within this season, they've gone all over the board from, look, this is a team that just knocked off Duke that looked like it was going up into the top 4 seed conversation. I believe I still had them on the 5 seed line, but a team that was in the mix for, big things. If they had finished this regular season strong, could have gotten all the way up into these top seeded conversations. A team that had not long before that been in the 7-8 seed conversation, slipping a little bit too far towards the bubble for anyone's liking. Now they take this loss to Miami. They slip back down the board just a little bit into probably the 6 seed range at this point. And it's just been the ups and downs that we've seen. So many peaks and valleys. I understand that there's been injuries along the way. I understand that there's been various different factors that have gone into this, but it's just the fact of the matter that this is an inconsistent basketball team. We know that they can put together some big time wins. Can they do it consistently? Can they do it in just a consecutive order? That's the question that I have for this team as we approach postseason play, because whether it's the ACC tournament where, like we've talked about, there is better depth, you're going to have to, in order to win the conference title, go through 2, 3, maybe even 4 NCAA tournament caliber teams, not just 1 or 2 at the very end of the things. And then in the NCAA tournament, we know the gauntlet that is. So I still have questions about this North Carolina team. They've got a lot of pieces that are very interesting, that are very exciting, but we don't always see them seem to click into place. The guard play doesn't always match what you get from the bigs. Caleb Wilson's energy doesn't always translate over when he exits the game. Things like that that just need to kind of come together, kind of just reach that final form. It feels like they've got it in short batches. They've got it in sometimes even larger doses, but it has not just stuck for the entirety of the season. So an interesting team to try to follow, to try to figure out, can they find that consistency here in the last month of the season?
Saturday, we do get a matchup of the 2 top teams in the ACC. Clemson at Duke, 11 a.m., bright and early Central Time on ESPN. This is where the college basketball season really starts to get fun. And we've seen some of these big matchups, right? We've seen Louisville and NC State Monday night. We've seen, Carolina Duke in their first episode of this season. But you get into these top of the league type of matchups that have huge implications on seeding and standings for the ACC tournament. Clemson at Duke. Let's preview this game. You can get in there for a cool $500. But what is your take from where I think we'll both be watching it, which is on our couch?
Yeah, I think that this is become an interesting ACC tie over the last few years. We've talked about, outside of Duke, Clemson has really become one of the most consistent programs in the ACC. We talked about North Carolina obviously has the top end outcomes, but they've been up and down throughout Hubert Davis's tenure. So for Clemson to kind of fill that role and really become the third lock for the ACC when it comes to NCAA tournament conversations has been quite a fascinating development here recently. Clemson, like you said, up here at the top of the conference once again. A team that early on in non-conference play, I don't know how many people really even thought that this year was going to be another one of their just consistent ho-hum seasons. Oh, look, we're at the top of the ACC standings. But they've really gotten things figured out. They've been a team that has found a lot of consistency. Obviously, though, they take a loss here recently. And so now they come into this Duke matchup looking to get their marquee win, get their big resume boosting performance. But on the road, this Duke team has been really, really special at home in just putting teams away and just making sure that there is no chance. So I still have to go with this Duke team. I think that they are the best team in the ACC. Like I said, that Duke UNC game is always different, particularly when they head on the road. And even in that game, Duke was in control for a large majority of that performance and really kind of let that game slip away down the stretch. So I've got to go with Duke here. I think that they've been the force in the ACC, and I think they'll probably pull this one out. Maybe not comfortably, but I think it'll end up closer to double digits than it is a one-score game.
James Fletcher, we appreciate it. And look, we'll be back with you, I'm sure, next week, talk about some of these other matchups. We got Miami at NC State, Virginia playing Ohio State. I mean, Louisville, Baylor. Fun weekend of college hoops in the ACC. We appreciate you previewing it with us here on All Access AM.
Yep, anytime.
There he goes. James Fletcher stopping by with us this morning of On 3. And as we welcome in David Cunningham of Virginia Tech, coverage on Tech Sideline, we do want to remind you guys we're presented by our friends at Socorro Tequila. Make sure you go to SocorroTequila.com and buy 3 bottles and get free shipping. So great opportunity for you guys to try the award-winning tequila today. With that deal, you don't even have to go find it at your local liquor store. You can go grab it online and get it shipped directly to your house. So try our friends at Socorro Tequila today. The link to their shop is in our bio. And now we are really excited to welcome in David Cunningham to the show. David, thanks so much for the time this morning, and welcome back.
Thanks for having me, man.
When you have gone through your last couple of months covering Virginia Tech and the James Franklin era, now pushing 3 months, what has this run been like for the Hokies?
It's been kind of crazy. Virginia Tech's never really had a recruiter as a head coach. Frank Beamer was okay in his time once he got the program up and rolling, but James Franklin is a recruiter at his heart. That's what he does best. And so it's been a little bit of a change. You saw him come in late November and turn what Virginia Tech had as a sub 100 class into a top 25 signing day class. And then, well, you go out in the transfer portal and you add a quarterback like Ethan Grunkemeyer from Penn State, and you add some different pieces here and there across the board, really revamp your entire roster. It's been a lot. They've also added, all these coaches, new coaching staff, but I think they're in a pretty good place. And James Franklin's kind of hit the ground running. He's only been there in place for about 90 days. And I think you're starting to really see his impact across the board.
And when you see what James Franklin's done in the transfer portal, how much did you have to change your expectations for year one of this program under him, or what do you think now that we've seen the results get on the table here?
I think this can be a really good team. I'm still interested, Billy, to see what happens in spring football once we get a really good feel for this team. because I think on paper they've got a lot of good pieces, but it's also one of these things where they just went 3-9. We've seen big turnarounds. Just don't have to ask Kurt Signetti about that. Turnarounds are possible really quickly in this era. What I'm curious to see is how everything meshes together. I think they've got a good quarterback. They've got a good running back room. Is the offensive line revamped enough? That's one of the big questions. Defensive line, I think they've got enough defensive line pieces. But I look at linebacker and I go, there are a lot of questions there that need to be answered still. They've got a lot of bodies at defensive back between corner and safety, but who's going to play where? There are a lot of questions still. But I think this roster has been overhauled and it's improved. How improved? Are we talking 8 wins? Are we talking 10 wins? I'm not really sure. I think it's probably around 8 or 9. That'd be my guess. And they also have a really tough schedule. You have to look at that too. They got to go to SMU. They got to go to Clemson. They got to go to Miami. And that's all basically in the second half of the season. They got Virginia at home too. So it'll be interesting to see how this thing shakes out. But Virginia Tech is in much better hands, of course. And it's interesting to say that, given that Brent Pry, the former head coach, is James Franklin's defensive coordinator. But that's how this situation is going to work now, and it's going to be very interesting.
As Ethan Grunkmeyer takes over at quarterback, in all likelihood, I would assume. I mean, I know there's other quarterbacks on the roster, but sure seems like he would be that guy. What are the expectations from an identity perspective on offense, or is that something that we're all going to have to kind of wait and see? Do you think we see a shift from how they played at Penn State and just kind of grinding it out versus seeing what we see in the ACC, a little bit more of wide open offenses for the most part?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because James Franklin talked about that a little bit once or twice. I think it might have been in his introductory press conference about how they want to spread it out a little bit more, which might come as a surprise to some Penn State fans, because it's like, what the heck? We did not do that at all at Penn State. But I think they kind of want to shift the identity a little bit. And Ty Howell is the new offensive coordinator. He was James Franklin's tight ends coach for the last handful of years. And we spoke with them within the last 2 weeks about how they see eye to eye, Franklin and Howell, about what they want to do. And they've got a quarterback in Ethan Grunkemeyer that is not that mobile. Not that he's not athletic, but he's not really a running quarterback. That's a shift from what Virginia Tech wanted to do in the past, where you had Kyron Jones, who was a run-first guy. You've got a quarterback in Ethan Grunkemeyer that his completion percentage for the season last year, if he were to have those same numbers at Virginia Tech, it would be a single-season completion record for the Hokies. So you're talking about a guy who is very, very accurate, very, very efficient. And he's he just finished his redshirt freshman year. He's got multiple years to build and continue to get better. And they brought over Daniel Bryant, the quarterback's coach from Penn State, who obviously has a lot of familiarity with Grunkemeyer. So I think you'll see them spread it out more and air it out a little bit more. But Billy, that goes back to the offensive line for me. I think you've got a really good quarterback, yes, but you have to be able to protect him. And Matt Moore is the Virginia Tech offensive line coach. It's his second straight year. James Franklin kept him around. That position was one that Brent Pry never really got right in his tenure. And I'm curious to see if they can kind of get the offensive line figured out. Because if they can protect Ethan Grunkemeyer, they've got receivers, they've got running backs, they've got tight ends, they revamped that room as well. I think they can be a pretty good team, but it all starts up front, and that was a weak spot for the Hokies for the last couple of years.
When you found out the news that Brent Pry was going to be the defensive coordinator, where were you? What was your reaction? Did you hear it coming?
A little bit. It's funny. We talked to James Franklin around his introductory press conference and asked him, would there be a possibility Brent Pry would be back? And he kind of shied away from it. I think he was so in the moment of his own, hiring and whatnot. But when we got the news, it was kind of mid-December that hey, this is kind of going to happen, or has a real chance of happening, a couple weeks after Franklin was hired. And I go back to what James Franklin said about Brent Pry at his introductory press conference, where he started tearing up when he was asked about him. Their relationship, Billy, is very unique, Brent Pry and James Franklin. Franklin played quarterback for Brent Pry's dad at East Stroudsburg University up in Pennsylvania about 30 years ago. And Brent and James formed this unique bond, and they coached together at Vanderbilt, Penn State, now Virginia Tech. And one of the things that Franklin mentioned last week was that Brent Pry was a guy I was considering to be my defensive coordinator no matter where I went. For example, I'm throwing this out there. Had James Franklin taken a, say, Arkansas job, well, Brent Pry would have been one of his top choices to go be the defensive coordinator. So why not? Why wouldn't it work at Virginia Tech? It's only weird because he's the former head coach. But I think James Franklin talking to the fans about how much Brent Pry meant to him throughout this process of telling it out like it is. Hey, here's the job you're walking into. Here's the positives. Here's the negatives. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. And also, I think it says a lot about Brent Pry that he's able to kind of weather that. And you know, he's a guy who truly loves Virginia Tech, but to be fired and then to come back. And Billy, I have never seen a coach get a fired coach who only won 3 games, had a really bad season, come back and get a standing ovation from the fans.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the Virginia Tech fans look at this and go, he was a great guy, but he wasn't a good coach. But they also look at him as part of the reason James Franklin's in Blacksburg. So it's a very just unique situation and really cool that he's back. And he feels refreshed, Billy, because guess what? He's no longer Brent Pry, the head coach. He's Brent Pry, the scheme up blitzes defensive coordinator. He's a guy who can focus on positional meetings and get his hands in the dirt and focus on blitz packages and whatnot. So I think he's really excited. He feels kind of a breath of fresh air because he doesn't have all that weight on his shoulders anymore.
It's going to be fascinating to watch that. That's where I don't have as many worries about Virginia Tech. And I'm glad, and for if you didn't listen to the show earlier, we were talking about some of the quarterbacks and we were talking about the early rankings that came out where CBS Sports has Virginia Tech at 5 in the ACC. Now that's relative to a league that's not crazy, but you see some of the things that a lot of other people maybe don't see. You see it, what we all see, which is Ethan Grunkmeyer and James Franklin, big name, Brent Pry's defense back, kind of some of those things, but it's still a heavy lift. But if there's one area that I kind of have confidence in, it's that they do have their defense kind of back in a sense. And I think there's a lot to, kind of hang your hat on in that regard, that there's not going to be that overhaul in that respect. So what it is for Virginia Tech, I feel like a lot of it's offensive personnel and trying to kind of get that fire lit for James Franklin, and that's what spring's going to be. But when you look at that roster building, and you kind of sit back and maybe give it a overall grade for us, just to kind of give us some good expectations, I think, going into spring and then the fall. What would you kind of grade out everything from the roster building piece?
I would probably give it a B. I think it could be a little bit better. And the tough part is, Billy, there's still some unproven guys. Like there are guys who were really, really highly touted high school guys that they brought in. I look at the defensive line. I go, Javion Hilson from Missouri. He was a former 5-star high school recruit. They brought him in, and they are very excited about him. They brought in a couple different guys at linebacker, cornerback. I mean, 30-plus transfers, and there are going to be guys all over the place. There are just some guys in spots that are unproven, and I think that's the tough part. But I think it is a solid. I would give it a solid like B roster construction. And I think when you compare it to what the Hokies had, given they went 3-9, man, that's night and day. And I think they're going to be in a much better spot. And I like the way it is constructed. I'm curious to get kind of see how it shakes out, what the depth chart looks like, who rises to the top, because I think they've got a lot of talent in a lot of places. I'm interested. I don't know as much about the depth I think they feel confident about some of those guys in the two deep. James Franklin, of course, says they feel confident about all of them. But I think I look at like linebacker and I go, okay, who's going to kind of rise to the top? There are a lot of guys who are unproven, a lot of highly touted recruited guys. But at some point, you got to go play and you got to go make plays. So I think it's solid. They didn't get a ton of guys defensively with a lot of snaps and a lot of experience. One of the guys they did is Jaquez White. He was an all Sun Belt player at corner at Troy. I think he's a guy that immediately steps into that kind of role and is a starter for you alongside a guy like Isaiah Brown Murray, who is back. So I think they did probably a B job in terms of roster construction, Billy, and I think they did a good job of meshing their old roster and the guys they wanted to keep with the guys they wanted to bring in.
The last one for me on Virginia Tech football, and I do want to talk briefly about the win over Clemson last night. You look at the schedule for Virginia Tech, and we could be going into October with an undefeated Virginia Tech Hokies team, just with the way it lays out. If all things go, as planned, they have an opportunity here to make some noise in year one. How important is that kind of fast start, capitalize on it, and then let the chips fall where they may the rest of this schedule? Because it's still a schedule that has Pitt, Cal, Georgia Tech, Clemson, SMU, Miami, and then Virginia on it. So it's not an easy slate, but you can at least ease into this schedule, at least like it looks like to me.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in the non-conference, VMI Old Dominion, and then at a road game at Maryland, I think that'll be a unique game given James Franklin was a long-time assistant there under Ralph Friesian. The last time the Hokies played there, he was on Maryland staff. And then you got Boston College. That's about as, I think, friendly as an ACC opener as you could have. That I look at those first four ACC games, BC, Pitt, Cal, Georgia Tech, and I go, man, I think they've got a pretty good draw there to start. And I think what the hope is that the Hokies figure out who they are in those first 6 to 8 games of the season and find a groove where they build up some momentum, where they get off to a good start. Say they start 4-0. And that game against Narduzzi and Pitt on a Friday night will be very interesting given Franklin's former Pennsylvania ties. But I think the schedule on the front end, Billy, shakes out very nicely. The back end is a little more difficult. I mean, they go at Clemson, at SMU, at Miami, and Virginia with a home game against Stanford squeezed in between. Those are your final 5 games. That is not easy. But you've got to take care of business, I think, on the front end. And I think they've got a good opportunity to. I think they will take advantage of it. If so, I think that kind of gets you off on a good start and kind of gives you an opportunity to maybe overachieve a little bit. Say you start 5-0 and you're 2-0 in the ACC to start. Well, you go to Cal and you've got a lot of momentum. You're playing really good football. If you can build up as many wins as you can before that really, really critical stretch late, I think that gives you a good opportunity to overachieve.
Let's go back to Wednesday night and Virginia Tech getting it done against Clemson. A huge win for the NCAA tournament hopes and dreams of the Hokies. They win 76-66, improved to 17-8. They're back to 500 now in ACC play. Your takeaways from that game and what that means for the Hokies as a whole.
Yeah, I was there in Clemson last night, and I thought that was Virginia Tech's most complete performance of the season, at least since New Year's Eve against Virginia in that triple overtime game, but maybe all season. Billy, we have not seen Virginia Tech shoot the ball great lately. In the last 4 games, they had shot below 43%. And the Hokies went 52% from the floor and 52% from 3. They were on offensively. And Mike Young talked about how they tweaked some different things over the last 2 days of practice coming into it. And against a really good Clemson defense that's top 15 in adjusted efficiency, they did not want the ball to stick. They wanted the ball to keep moving, and I thought they did a good job with that. But then I look at the defensive side of the ball. Clemson's an interesting team, as you know, that uses so much depth. Brad Brownell plays about 10 guys, and they get a lot of bench production. I think they got about 35 points from the bench yesterday. But it was really just 3 guys. Tech shut down R.J. Godfrey and Justin Porter. Outside of the 3 guys who scored the ball really well, the rest of the team was like 5 for 25. Hokies did a really good job of playing defense on everybody. Guys, of course, are going to get their buckets, and somebody has to score. But I thought Virginia Tech's defense down the stretch, particularly in those final few minutes, was huge. They were really good in the second half on that end of the floor, and they were able to close out a game. It wasn't too long ago that I was in Dallas and Virginia Tech lost to Boopy Miller on that half-court buzzer beater, right? But you turn the page time and time again, and I think Virginia Tech has showed, hey, we can close out games now. They've gotten the hang of that, and you saw that against Clemson. Tigers ended the game 2 for 11 from the floor. So I like the way they finished it. They needed this one for the resume, Billy, and they got it. And now the trick is they've got 5 or 6 games left, and you've got to close it out. You can't afford to slip up, especially like when you go home this weekend and you got a Florida State team that's playing pretty good basketball as of late. So I like the way they played. What'll be interesting to see is if they can continue it.
David Cunningham, we appreciate the time, my friend, and thanks so much for stopping by. We'll have to do it again. Great insights.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me.
There he goes, David Cunningham with us this morning on All Access AM. All of you Hokie fans had a lot of great things to say about when we had him on right around the James Franklin introductory press conference. So we've been just jonesing to have David back on. So we appreciate him of Tech Sideline. Check out his work over there on Tech Sideline for all of your Hokies needs. And as we close out the show here, we like to do this. We'll give you guys a quick little rundown here. We touched on it just briefly with James Fletcher on the show, but the rundown of ACC basketball on Saturday. What a slate. We talked about Clemson Duke, 11 a.m. on ESPN, Georgia Tech at Notre Dame at 11 on the CW, Cal at BC at 11 a.m. on ACC Network. So a couple of, kind of games without much luster or without much shine, I should say, in the early slates outside of Clemson Duke. But then you get Pitt at North Carolina at 1 on ESPN, FSU at Virginia Tech, which David mentioned at 1 p.m. Central on ACC Network, SMU all the way up at Syracuse at 1 on the CW. Then we get into some fun here as well. Louisville plays a neutral site game at Dickies Arena right here in Fort Worth, right down the street from the quote-unquote All Access AM studios, 3 p.m. Central Time on Saturday. Stanford at Wake Forest, all the way out coast to coast, 3 p.m. ACC Network. Miami goes to NC State. That is going to be, I think, one intriguing ball game. Huge kind of seeding implication, all sorts of things. Matchup for both teams in that one, 3 p.m. ESPN2. And then we get a nightcap of sorts, 7 p.m. Central Time. Virginia in a neutral site game in Nashville, Tennessee, takes on the Ohio State Buckeyes. So a fun Saturday of ACC hoops ahead for you guys. So make sure you guys check it all out. One more quick note before we get out of here, and I forgot to do this as we were talking about Louisville in the top 25. They did lose their offensive line coach, Richard Owens. He is going to Alabama to be the tight ends coach. So that is a big now hole in the coaching staff of Louisville that they've got to get fixed, because you have a month-ish from when most teams are going to start spring ball here. So the Alabama coaching staff gets revamped, and they have a new offensive line coach in Adrian Clem coming in. Now Richard Owens comes in as the tight ends coach for Kalen DeBoer and the Tide. So another assistant coaching change here. We're in the middle of February now. We're seeing it still, whether it be DeMarco Murray going from Oklahoma to the NFL. Oklahoma hired Michigan defensive backs coach Lamar Morgan. So things are shifting in the college football world. So we will keep you guys up to date on all things ACC in that regard. So really appreciate you guys being here with us on this Thursday show. We appreciate our friends at Horn Legend, at Socorro Tequila, at Sportsmo. Guys, download that Sportsmo app. Just kind of play around with it. You don't have to, load up a little $10. And the cool thing is you're soon going to be able to bet your friend head to head, and it directly impact their student athletes. So instead of saying, hey, I got you and I'll Venmo you or whatever, $10 if my team wins, and you Venmo me $10 if your team loses. Guess what? You can legitimately take money out of the hands of their student athletes in a sense, and make your friends pay for your own school's success. So some cool things coming down the pipeline for Sportsmo. So download that app today. And look, we appreciate you guys for watching All Access AM. Reminder, Monday, we begin 8 to 9 a.m. Central, 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern time streaming. So we're hoping that it gets you guys back in the comments section a little bit more. We kind of see a lot more interaction in that respect. So make note, when you're waking up and you're having your coffee and you don't see us live maybe around your usual time, we're pushed back an hour for the off season. So excited to roll that out and see how it goes, and continue to bring you guys great content nonetheless. So thanks everyone for supporting us, and please hit the like, rate, review, and subscribe buttons on your platform. And please let us know what you'd like to see on the show. So have a great weekend, everybody. Enjoy the Olympics and some more ACC hoops. I'm Billy Embody. This has been All Access AM. Thanks for watching.